Today we're going to be going over basic electronic dance music theory. I'm going to be using Ableton Live as my DAW, but you can use whatever program that you got set up. It's all good. Right now I have a dubstep drum loop set up, and I also have my BPM at 140, and I have an instance of Massive opened up, but you don't really have to worry about that. Just sit back, take some notes, pull out your pen and your pad. Alright, so I've chosen track. I replicated the bass line in that 6 song 3/5 style, and the reason why I decided to use this track is because the notes that comprise its bass line are from a single scale, um, rather than an unusual one. It's a it's not the first scale that you'll learn in typical music theory class, but hopefully it'll give you some new fresh ideas about creating bass lines. So before we look at this in more detail, let's take a step back and consider the larger question at hand. What is scale? Well, in music theory, a scale is nothing more than a specific set of notes that form the basis of a musical composition. So there's many types of scales with 5, 6, 7 or more notes, but some of the types are more common than others in the music that we're used to hearing, and we can find whatever scale is being used in whatever given piece of music by analyzing what notes are being used, the pattern of the intervals between those notes, and the root or the tonal center of the piece. So the one note that is the most important and provides a reference point for everything else is the root key. Probably the most familiar scale in Western music is C major, and I have that opened up right here in this instance of Massive. Let me unmute it. So, pretty much it's made up of all white keys on the keyboard, and it starts with C. So it just goes up. The notes that are used here in order would be C, D, E, F, G, A, and B, and it sounds like this. And that's pretty much the most familiar, common scale in Western music. And the pattern of the intervals is as we move from note to note, we're either moving to an adjacent white key, or which is what we call a half step or a minor second, or we're skipping one black key and then we're going to the next white key, which is what we call a whole step or a major second. So if we look at the pattern of this major scale, we have C would be considered a whole step, D would be considered a whole step, E is a half step, F is a whole step, G is a whole step, A would be a whole step, and B would be a half step, and then back to C where we started again. So, pretty much the root key in this case would be C. So simply because we played it first and it's the lowest note sounding here, which is very important actually, because hearing C as the root key is what makes us hear the rest of the scale as a major scale with its characteristics: happy, sunny, optimistic, etc. So how do we know which note is the root of a given piece of music? That's the question. Well, generally it's not hard to tell which note is the root. It's simply the most prominent single note in the entire piece, the one that is often the most repeated. In electronic dance music, the root will generally be the most prominent note in the bass line. So it's the note that the bass line circles around and keeps coming back to. Pretty much, if we keep all the same notes in our music, but we change the root, it'll have a huge effect on the sound and the whole vibe of the scale as a whole. Which brings me to my next point. What is mode? Well, whenever the topic of scale comes up, you'll often hear the word mode used as well. And any given scale or set of notes will have a number of different modes, depending on which note is the root. And each mode has its own characteristic sound or mood. To hear a huge difference the root note has on the overall sound, we'll try these two similar exercises. So if we start off and we play from low C, and if you're on a keyboard, you'd have your left hand and you'd hold down low C, and then you'd play the other notes of the scale in order with your right hand in a higher range on the keyboard, so it would be C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So this is the sound of C major, and we just went over that. So moving on, if you play a low A on your keyboard now, and you hold that down, so we'll just drag this down here because I don't have my keyboard plugged in. So if you hold that down, and then with your right hand you would play A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's the characteristic of a darker sound, and it changes it, and it becomes what's known as an A minor. So this is the sound of an A minor. So if you notice that the same exact notes are used in both of these examples, but the root note is different, and that makes a major difference. Look at it this way. C major, A minor are actually just two different modes of the same scale or same set of notes. So going back to this bass line that I replicated from Dat6 3/5 style, we see that if we play along with the main bass riff on a MIDI controller and record these notes, we find it looks like something like this, and it's not the same sound, it's just pretty much the same keys and notes. So 3/5 style uses a set of pitches that comprise the so-called double harmonic major, also known as the Byzantine scale or the Arabic scale. So rearranging the notes here in order from lowest to highest, the pitches would be G, G sharp, B, C, D, D sharp, and F sharp. So I hear the root as G in this case, and this is the lowest note in the phrase, and each bar of this phrase begins with G and goes up and then returns back down to where it began. So that's pretty much the dissection of this. And as you can see, this scale has somewhat of a different structure than more common major or minor scales like the one we just looked at. So what's the pattern of the intervals here? Well, G would be considered a half step, and actually, well, G would be considered a half step, G sharp a minor third, which is 3 half steps, B a half step, C a whole step, D a half step, D sharp a minor third, and F sharp. So if we take a look at this, you see that in addition to the whole half step, whole step thing, the scale also has 2 larger intervals. The minor third, which is the same as 3 half steps, which is between C sharp and E, and also it occurs between G sharp and B. So essentially what we have here is it's really common in dubstep. You often hear dubstep bass lines and other musical elements based on diminished harmonic minor or other scales with unusual intervals, like what we said earlier, the Byzantine scale, which is used here. Also, well, although styles, fashions, and subgenres come and go, dubstep as a whole has always been rather unsettling and disturbing style of music, with the dubstep basslines often reflect this by avoiding the simple major or minor scales and emphasizing on dissonant intervals such as the tritone or the minor second. Basically, we pretty much we see that when we analyze music like this, we're not necessarily trying to figure out what's going on in the artist's head. We're just trying to figure out the process that they took to make this. So to find some pattern in it, what we can make us so we can do this ourselves, make your own track with this style. So if you want to Google any terms, the name is Byzantine scale, and it's been attached to the scale before, but it's not necessarily the name. It doesn't really matter. The important thing is that you're learning that this set of notes makes this type of sound, and adding that the whole storehouse of musical ideas you draw on when you make new tracks, and this can just add to all that. And so now that you learned about scale, you can try making some bass lines or melodies of your own while limiting yourself to using only these notes or only a few of them. Exploring a new scale like this can lead you to lots of different avenues in music when you're creating music. And you know so hopefully you guys can use this and you can use it to your benefit. So